Broadcasting from the campus of Lynn Benton Community College. We are the Mid-Valley STEM-CTE Hub. I'm your host, Kacey, and this is Closing the Gap. Hey, Nova, how's it going?
I am doing amazing. How are you?
Awesome. So, for the listeners who aren't familiar with your work, could you tell us a little about yourself and how you found yourself in this career of being a filmmaker and an artist?
So I guess hello, I'm Nova West. I use they, them pronouns, and I am a wildlife filmmaker specializing in underwater cinematography. I'm also a deep sea explorer, so I work on a deep sea exploration vessel as a video engineer and expedition documentarian. So I'm kind of the eyes of the operation and the person that gets to tell these wild stories. I grew up in small town cornfield, Minnesota. So I didn't have a concept of like the ocean at all growing up. The first time I saw it was like in fourth grade, and I was kind of scared of it. And then I didn't really see it again until I was an adult. So there was like something in my DNA that was just kind of screaming for the ocean. And something about it felt like home. I just needed to learn more about it, if that makes sense. Surf's Up was my favorite movie, if that is any context.
Nice.
So, little surfer penguins. I've always been driven by art. Half of my family is farmers, the other half is artists. So we have an interesting mix of human beings in my family, and art was always fostered at a very young age. So I followed that trajectory, I guess. I started out in college with an art major, and then I realized that I liked being outside more than I liked being in a studio, so I switched to outdoor education. So lots of like animal handling. Like at one point I was like a falconer, and then like
Oh, that's so awesome.
and like like many lives were lived. But I realized that like combining that art and that need for adventure was something that I didn't quite yet find. Like working outdoor ed was fun, but it wasn't the whole picture for me. And so one of my professors at the end of my like senior year of college was like, "Hey, Nova, I've noticed that like for every project, every assignment, you make a video." Like that's consistent. I'm like, yeah, like I loved at the time making music videos and things like that. So he's like, "How would you feel about like an internship at Nat Geo?" I was like, "What? You could just hand those out?" Like, but he happened.
That's epic.
Yeah. It was like, and keep in mind, like I grew up in a very small town that's like kind of an island surrounded by corn. So like my concept of the world was very, very small, and like I didn't like, never in a million years did I think that Nat Geo was a place that someone like me even remotely would have fit into. And so I never like let myself dream that far, if that makes sense. So when he brought this up, I was like, oh my gosh, absolutely. Like, sign me up. He happened to know a student that had gone through the program 10 years prior, who was now like a Nat Geo host. And so, it's all about your connections. So he reached out, and I got like this unofficial internship at Nat Geo. And this is the long version of my story, kind of. But yeah, that's kind of what like was the springboard for my career. I worked in post-production starting off. So like editing, I was very good at editing. So it was easily like transferable skill. I taught myself how to use like Sony Vegas Pro, back in like the early 2000s.
Nice. Classic.
Yeah. So I worked on like a few animal vet shows, and then I once again was caught in this thought of like, wow, I wish I was not in a box. I wish I was outside adventuring, that's the whole reason why I switched my major. And now I found myself in a similar position, a little bit closer, but not quite figuring out all the pieces to the puzzle. So I happened to start the Pride, or co-found, I should say, the Pride Employee Resource Group for Nat Geo, because I was like, I'm a queer person and I need support in different ways than my colleagues. And I knew one other trans person at the org, and we were like, what if we, make a group about it? So I happened to know like all sorts of people across departments, which was super helpful. And I ended up just knowing the right person at the right time, who was crewing up for an expedition to search for Amelia Earhart's plane on a deep sea exploration vessel.
Oh, that's so
Yeah,
cool.
like absolutely bonkers. And they needed an editor at sea. I was like, wow, that could be me. And they decided to take this chance on me. And so I like had to get a passport. Whoa, I had like, it was my first time getting a passport, leaving the country, being on a ship, like being on a Nat Geo expedition. Like there's a lot of firsts. But that expedition happened to be on the EV Nautilus, which is where I do my deep sea exploration work now. So that's how I got connected there. And yeah, the rest is kind of history. From there, I like shot into freelance and became an underwater cinematographer and all that jazz.
That's epic. As another person who grew up in the Midwest, I don't know if Nat Geo understands the impact that those stacks of magazines have on kids.
Yes, absolutely. I used to cut them up and use them to like collage and things. And like, I, I'm not the strongest readers, but like the visuals are really important, and like I think that did have a
Yeah, they're
huge
gorgeous.
impact. Yeah.
Awesome. Um, so you had mentioned that you were even doing video back in college, way before you even started with your internship. Can you talk a little bit about your first filmmaking project and some of the learning curves you experienced during that time?
Yeah, totally. So I've been like, I don't know, quote unquote filmmaking since I was a kid. Like ever since I was old enough to pick up my family's VHS recorder, camcorder. Like I was in it. So like there's learning curves along throughout my lifetime, from like stop motion to music videos to, my educational videos in college, like whatever I was doing, I had a blast with. But my first like truly mine project happened in 2022 when I moved to San Diego from DC. I was like, I need the ocean. Peace out, DC. um, and I ended up making a film with two of my best friends, who one of which was a wildlife filmmaker. And I was like, oh my gosh, another non-binary wildlife filmmaker. I've never seen anyone else like me in this field. We have to be best friends. Um, and we actually became best friends, which was cool.
Awesome.
Um, and then their partner, who was like dipping their toes into marine biology. And this was like the first project, like I before that point had worked on many different projects, including like Emmy winning Secrets of the Whales and like Penguin Town and like, all these like wildlife films. But I had never really worked on my own projects. It was always someone else's vision. Um, so I finally had this opportunity where like I, saved up enough to get my scuba diving certification in 2018. I saved up enough to get my first underwater camera that was like, cinema quality in like 2021. And then this happened in 2022. So like all the stars were aligning, where I finally had the tools I needed to tell an underwater story. Um, and so, yeah, there's so many learning curves along the way. Like, how do you put together a script? I'm not a writer personally. Like, I have big ideas, but I need help getting those out sometimes. Um, and so, how do you write a script? How do you like structure a film to make it interesting? And like, but like the number one thing that really drove me is like telling ocean stories and telling queer stories in the ocean, which are like, to me, kind of, the Venn diagram is almost a circle. Like I think the ocean is very
For sure.
queer. So yeah, there, and like shoot logistics, you name it, it was a strong learning curve across the board.
I appreciate that you brought up the element of collaboration, because I think that there's a lot of creative people that want to make things and they feel like it has to be in a vacuum. in order to, be theirs or to have some sort of claim over its creation. And I appreciated that you had mentioned collaboration also because, we just have different skill sets. And
Mhm.
so I can imagine that, you're really, if you're really good at the cinematography and you need help with the script, it's like, I can't do everything. I'm just one person.
Right. Right. Well, and like throughout my life, I really try to push back on the like individualistic kind of capitalist mindset that like you
Hmm.
have to do all the things and you also have to monetize all your skills and hobbies. And it's like, nah, like rely on your friends. Like let people pick up in the areas that they have the most expertise. Let them shine in their areas that they want to. And like I believe that like your project will only be better if you collaborate. And also like when telling specifically queer stories, like I as a creator and storyteller have a responsibility to tell those in a way that's accurate and not harmful. And the best way to do that is to get many different perspectives and to make sure that I'm not just preaching my perspective of queerness because it's, you know, a very narrow lens. And so like I think collaboration is the only way to do that. Um, to your point. So
For sure. Yeah. And I think you also touched on another interesting point of like the kind of manufactured scarcity.
mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. If someone else is around helping me, then there must be, I don't know, an issue around the power, or I don't have enough say or something. But I know personally, I really like to collaborate. So,
Right.
um, but so you were mentioning how it's really important to you to tell queer stories, and I feel like you're starting to kind of get to talking about Diving for Rays, your
Yes.
documentary. Yeah, which, by the way, that closing scene where she's swimming with all the rays,
Yes.
so
Oh,
beautiful.
thank you.
So I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about what she ends up talking about, the main character
Mhm.
in Diving for Rays, this stigma and this lack of representation for the LGBTQ plus community in science. How can we be better stewards for students coming up into the science fields?
Mm. So I think a big part of it is like the whole like I don't know through line of the film is like sometimes you have to be so you can see. And we
Mhm.
kind of got that from a different documentary who did not do this topic justice. And their through line was you can't be what you can't see. And I think that like that line completely diminishes the people who have to trailblaze in order to follow their heart and do what they want to do. And like sometimes you have to be your own role model. Sometimes you have to be the person you needed when you were younger to give you permission to pursue your wildest dreams, you know? um,
Mhm.
so I think there's a lot to be said for visibility when it's feasible, when it's safe, when it's even sometimes when it's not safe. Like I think visibility can be really um, powerful, but that's something that if it's possible, um, can really impact the next generation that's coming up and feeling like they have to decide between who they are and what they want to do. Um, so I try my best to be as visible as possible. Like I'm out here, I'm like anytime I'm introducing myself, I always say my pronouns. Like I'm like I just want to be the world's loudest non-binary underwater cinematographer, which is not a hard challenge because I think I might be the first one, which is absolutely bonkers. But um,
And it's kind of cool to think about being the first in something.
yeah, I like it's both. I think really exciting because like everyone wants to kind of be a first. It's like Guinness World of
Yeah.
Book of World Records vibes, but also like it's very lonely, I think, to be realistic. Like it's really kind of devastating to see like this entire history of people existing and getting to do this amazing thing, which for me, like doing underwater cinematography is such a beautiful experience and like life changing for me. To know that like so many people from my community have never been able to experience that is absolutely devastating. And like, of course, when I'm in the field, I experience my own struggles, my own challenges because of who I am and how I look and how I exist. And like, there's no one to talk about that with who, like, truly to its core understands what I go through. So it can be really lonely to be honest, but that's part of, what fuels me to help future generations to be visible and to like open up doors for people, because I'm like, okay, yes, it really sucks to be the only one, but like no one else is going to have to hopefully experience that in this specific niche of a niche. So the other
Yeah.
the other thing too is like, I'm starting a mentorship program, which I'm so stoked about. Um,
Nice.
that's like specifically targeted at helping queer people enter the field of wildlife filmmaking with a focus on underwater cinematography. So taking on like one person every year and being like, I will teach you everything that I can teach you, anything you want to know, and like fly you out for at least one
Oh
shoot
man.
and do all that.
That's so cool. I young Casey would have been just all over that opportunity.
Yes. Right, like I'm like,
I
what would little me want to see, and then doing that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I feel like kindred spirits in a little bit of a way because I also like this idea of adventure and making media. And um, I think I had this awakening where I was watching Free Solo and I was
Mm,
like, that is so cool. But it's from such a perspective, such a hetero kind of normative perspective,
yeah,
especially based on the crew and the content of it, that it's like, how do you even see yourself
yeah.
in that? And I find it a hard question to ask people because I don't know if someone asked me, Casey, what is it like to be a queer person in marketing? I don't know. I don't know what I would say or like how could I better represent people
Mm,
like me in my field? And I'm not sure I would know what to say because I feel like um, I also want to respect people's like anonymity
mm,
to be able to just be any other person and not be um I don't know be the flag that we're sticking into the ground, be like, we're here.
right.
But also it's so important that we do that. And
Mhm,
I don't know, I was hoping maybe we could chat a little bit about finding some sort of middle ground of
mm,
how can we, I don't know, maybe just even champion for ourselves better, or um I don't know, be kind of like be more of a quiet um, flag in the ground instead of the one we're waving around
mhm.
on the battlefield.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I completely agree. I think there is a fine line and like a middle ground of like, you don't want to be like, hello, this is like my identity, like projecting it and vomiting on everything. Like that's not the goal.
Mhm.
But also, I think, especially to those who have the privilege of maybe like flying under the radar, not being as visibly queer, I think it's even more important to be like a degree of visible, if that makes sense. Like for me, like I don't
That
know,
makes
you look at
sense.
me and you're like, I don't know what's up, but this person's got something going on. Um, so like I've thrown like that anonymity out the window already. Um,
Yeah.
but I do think that like, yeah, there's a middle ground of, I think there's a like, how do I want to phrase this? So there's different types of like visibility and there's different types of like allyship to each other, right? And
Hmm.
I think that that visibility can come in different tiers of like being visible to anybody and being visible to your community, like same sees same. And I think,
That's a good point.
and yeah, and I think that like visibility for straight perception, like cishet perception, is completely different in my experience than visibility to my community, because like my community can pick up on the nuance. Like I don't have to tell you my pronouns. You could probably guess that like I'm maybe not within the gender binary, or like of some trans experience. So I think there's like some nuance there that we can really lean into, which I do on shoots all the time. Like I'm not always able to be like super vocal Nova. Sometimes I have to be like reserved subtle Nova because I don't know the people I'm working with, or I'm in a homophobic country, or whatever the soup of circumstance is. Sometimes I have to like quietly kind of suss out who I can trust and who I might think is also part of the community and connect with them. And I think that can be a really valid way of being visible, is just like one-on-one connection. So like for you in marketing, if you notice that there's a person that like is, if your queerdar is at all like working and a little accurate, like kind of connecting with that person that you think might be queer and chatting with them about it, and doing that like one-on-one, I think can be a middle ground maybe.
Yeah, for sure. And I appreciated that you were talking about kind of living in code
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, depending on like safety of just your general situation. Um, I feel like there's a lot of people that just don't know if they are safe or if they feel safe in all
Mm-hmm.
situations. But um, I think that just reaching out to students or like reaching out to colleagues or whoever, and just that's subtle,
Mm-hmm.
that subtleness, I think, is something. But I feel like we're also taught to be loud
Mm-hmm.
about it, and I think that's scary for some people, the introverts of the world.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Well, and like I try to remind myself that like if you remove the lens of like norms in Western society, you see
Hmm.
how loud cishet people are about their entire like identity and sexuality and culture. And so it feels loud for us to be that same level when really we're just saying the same thing but different, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
So don't let anybody tell you that you're too much also.
What kind of skill set, if a student wanted to follow in a career like yours, or like, oh, like I would love to work for Nat Geo, or I would love to be able to make a documentary for myself, do you think it'd be helpful for them to be more of a scientist first and then get into art, or be an artist and then specialize in some sort of science discipline, or maybe a completely different path? What would you recommend?
I love this question because I think every person's story and path that I've run into in this field is so wildly different that there's like no
Mhm.
one answer. And I hope that's like not a stressful answer and more of a comforting answer of like you can really follow your heart on this one. So I always recommend to people like if you're considering what you want to do going into college, if you're going to get some sort of college degree, do the thing that you can't teach yourself. So I started out in art, but deep down, I know I could have taught myself art. Like I had that background, and like, you can take an online class and knock that out. So if you're like, I don't know, between science and art and film, like science is kind of a thing that you need a degree in order to pursue further, whereas art is, it's helpful. Like I'm not saying that classes in art are not helpful. They've totally transformed and developed my sense of my inner artist. But at the same time, like if I had to go back, I probably would have just started with outdoor education because you do need an education degree for those types of jobs, and it
Mhm.
would have made my college time a little bit shorter. But at the end of the day, what's most important is not your degree when it comes to film. It helps to have a science background so you understand the things that you're filming. But what's more important, in my opinion, is your curiosity, your ability to pick up a new skill, and your like people skills. So like your network is everything in filmmaking. It's kind of this fun game in my brain of like who can I meet, who knows who, and like it's like a video game. Um, but
Mhm.
also like any skill set that you learn is going to be helpful in wildlife filmmaking. So if you're super into like backcountry backpacking, like wilderness survival, that is absolutely applicable. If you're someone who's interested in medicine, like knowing that kind of skill set is super helpful. And like people think of filmmaking as like the small facets of like, oh, it's either wildlife or it's like fiction or like whatever. But like even in documentary there's so many different topics where it's helpful to have a deeper understanding. So if your thing is like marine science, I know a lot of people in underwater cinematography who started out at marine science. I did not, so it's like
Yeah.
you can end up there eventually. um, but yeah, follow your passion. Like I think your strongest asset will be combining different skill sets. So for me, it
Hmm.
was combining film, photography, fine art, graphic design, and like my general need for adventure and outdoor education. Those things were like the perfect soup for like deep sea exploration, which I didn't have as an end goal. It just kind of happened, you know. Um, so that's kind of a long answer, but follow your dreams basically. Like follow your passions.
Totally.
If you're trying to like be super intentional about it, um, yeah, do the thing that you can't teach yourself.
For sure, for sure. So I'm hearing follow the passion, but what if the passion leads to a project that you're not super interested in?
Mm,
Do you hold out, or do you get the experience?
you gotta hold
What would
out.
Nova
You
do?
gotta hold out. I've worked on some shows that, oh, I really hate the idea that like you have to pay your dues in this industry where like everyone starts out on a show that they don't like. Everyone starts out in a position where they're like not fulfilled or not very thrilled about. It's, you know, a stepping stone to where you want to get to. I don't believe in that. Like, you need to do your time, but I do think it's realistic that you will at some point have to work on a project you don't like or function in a position that's not your goal. Like I've been an editor, I've been a production assistant, I've been an associate producer, I've been a director, I've been a producer, I've been a cinematographer. Like all those things have led to director of photography, which is like my jam. So yeah, you'll have to do it. And I think the most important thing is keep keep your stuff together, like keep your head in the game and know that like no matter what, you're getting the experience, you're getting like your resume builder or whatever, but more importantly, you're getting connections. And so how you
Hmm.
exist in a project you don't like is going to say so much about you. So like still stay positive, stay friendly, make sure you're like meeting the people because like these people work on so many other projects too. And that's kind of your ticket to getting on those projects that you do want to be on.
For sure. And you had mentioned connections, and earlier in our conversation, you talked about having a mentor kind of program. How would people find that?
That's such a good question. So my mentorship program is like still kind of loose. We're like I'm like putting it together. So it's in partnership with my National Geographic Explorer project. So right now I have one mentee that is kind of like my soft launch to this mentorship program. Um, so I'm hoping within the next few years I'll be able to make it an official thing. Um, so for now, it's not like a very public thing, but keep an eye on my website and my Instagram, and that's where I share all of my information when the time comes.
Awesome. So you're getting ready to go out back to sea soon, and you work on a mentorship program and maybe some other projects along the way. How is juggling tasks, like multitasking? Is that a skill that needs to be honed for a position like this?
Oh yeah, I would I would say you like if you want to be a freelancer and if you want to work on many different projects, especially ones that you care about, you need to be able to be organized and like self motivated. Like you got to be able to like get yourself to do the thing um, with or without external motivation. Otherwise, you're just going to be treading water. You're not going anywhere. So I have so many things going on right now. Like as we speak, which by the time this comes out will be past, but I'm getting ready for a shoot with PBS in Costa Rica. I'm getting ready for my first art show, which will be while I'm away, unfortunately. But you know, like I'm like working on three different paintings. I'm working on a film poster for somebody. I'm working on my Nat Geo Explorer project. I have a different project that I'm working on about prison abolition and um, kelp restoration. And so there's like so much happening.
That's so fascinating. You are living the dream.
I'm trying. I'm really trying. Well, and I gotta say, like, this field looks glamorous to a lot of people on the outside, obviously, especially with Instagram, social media, like, and this time of year it is. And then the other half of the year when I'm just like by myself in my house waiting for like someone to call me and like ask me to hop on a job. Those are the hardest parts, and like just like the feast and famine of it all is really challenging. So I'm living the dream most of the time, and some of the times I'm living a nightmare. But it, it's worth it.
For sure, for sure. I think that I would be if I was looking into a career like this and then I heard that, I'd be wondering, what's the stability like?
Oh, the stability. I think it really depends on the person and like what your jam is, what your thing is, and like what you have resources for. So like I started out with like $200 in my pocket, like really cutting it close there. Um, but like if you are able to be consistent with it, like even when I don't have a contract, I'm working pretty much 9 to 5 at home doing computer work, like reaching out to people, updating my website, like editing, re-editing my photos, editing my reel, like really putting myself out there. Um, you can achieve some stability with that, just knowing that you'll get contracts for the next part of the year, or at least hope you'll get contracts. I will say that the industry is really not good right now. Um, I think that's hopefully going to change in 2025, but I think it's been a challenge for a lot of people to find stability. So some people have been starting to do part-time gigs to kind of support their freelance work, or quitting freelance altogether and taking a full-time job. So just know that if you find yourself in this field and you're struggling, know that that's kind of part of it. But there are ways to find stability even in the instability, and I think that's having confidence in yourself that you'll make it through.
For sure. Not to minimize any feelings around that, but it sounds like it's another element of you playing a pioneering kind of role in your life, moving out to the coast. I mean, like it seems like both you were out on the East Coast, it sounded like, and now you're on the West
Mm-hmm.
Coast, and really carving this space for yourself in the industry, and then creating I mean, continuing to really just cook it and get more experiences for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Is do you feel like that adventurous kind of pioneering spirit is necessary, like a necessary trait for someone who wants to be in this industry?
I think it's definitely helpful, and I think pioneering can mean many things, and like I think no matter what, like bringing something new to the table is always going to be helpful. So like, um, but kind of what we were going back to earlier of like talking about how like, do you need to go to school for film or for science or things like that? It's like if your jam is like interpretive dance and you want to do, marine science, or you want to be a science communicator or filmmaker, like combining those loves of like interpretive dance and wildlife filmmaking brings a whole new spice to the table, So
Hmm.
I think that there's so many realms that we can all be pioneers um, in new ways that doesn't have to be like recarving a path necessarily. Um, but also like there's so many communities that are not represented in this field still, and like so many intersectional communities too, that I think there's always unfortunately I think there's always going to be some sort of pioneering in my lifetime for marginalized communities in this field, um, but it's certainly something worth doing, and bringing each other up while we kind of pioneer our own paths.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, no, I appreciate that answer for sure. um and I think something else that I've been wondering about is, we're talking a lot about developing a career here, and I think there's people that are very much into the gear aspect, in our culture, even, like the new iPhone's coming out, I need to get rid of my iPhone from last year, get the new one.
Mm-hmm.
But also I think, as a photographer myself, I also hear a lot of talk about it's not about the camera or the microphone. It's about how you're using those and how you're able to bring it into post, especially now that we live in such a, you know, an age where we have really great technology to do editing.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think is more important in this job? Um, the ability to be able to work your way around your equipment or be able to use technique?
Mm-hmm.
What's more marketable?
Mm. So I'm going to say the latter, um, but with an asterisk. So I definitely agree that like um, it's not necessarily about what you have. It's how you're able to use it and work with it, and um, like we all have a little like 4K camera in our pockets now, right? Um, and I'm actually starting to see like photography contests that have a section for phone photography, which is really cool. Um, so I think it's really easy to count yourself out, being like, oh, I don't have this like fancy camera and like it's so much money and all that stuff. But the best thing you can do is just source what you got and work with that. So like when I first started, I was at Nat Geo headquarters, which is already a privilege, right? Um, but I was able to like chat with the guys in the gear room and like let them or ask them to let me take a camera out for a weekend just to like learn how to use it, you know? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that like there's nothing wrong with also borrowing gear or like teaming up with another friend who has the same or similar aspirations and like buying a camera together, things like that. I'm also seeing a lot of people go back to like the early 2000s point and shoot cameras because at this point they're kind of like there's a signature to them that's nostalgic, similar to how people will use VHS or whatever to like create a certain look. So even like going to a thrift store and getting a point and shoot at this point has like nostalgic value that I think you can really use to your advantage. That being said, I do think that as much as like using what you have is a really important tool and like being resourceful is like so critical in this industry. It's really hard to learn like how to use a professional camera if you don't have one, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
like I shooting underwater especially I had shot on like those disposable underwater cameras, like the film cameras. I had shot on like a GoPro underwater, but when I got my underwater rig, that was like such a learning curve, and that was honestly for me one of the only ways to really like learn how to shoot underwater other than like putting my phone in a bag and putting it underwater, which is risky. So there are certain things that like you just kind of need the gear or need access to the gear in order to kind of figure it out, and be able to like use that. Um, I think especially if you're going the camera route and you're like, yeah, eventually I want to be, let's say, an underwater DP. You need to kind of start out as a assistant camera. So like knowing how to set up those rigs, how to operate those rigs is kind of the role of an assistant camera person, is to like prep the gear, right? So even getting your hands on a rental or friends or something to be able to do that job is super helpful.
For sure. Yeah, I like the idea of co-oping a
Oh
camera
yeah.
with a
Oh
buddy.
yeah.
I think that's a really great option for kind of hitting that, getting over that intersectionality of maybe like not having the funds and also whatever else you may be feeling that you're up against.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, I thought that was a really brilliant suggestion. Um, and yeah, the camera rentals are great, and I feel like people might not even know that's a possibility. But I'm not exactly sure where you're located, but here in Portland, there's a company that you can go rent a camera and a lens. It's like $100 a day for the two things together, and that would give you some experience. I also think it's interesting that you were mentioning how you can't really get that experience of the high tech kind of equipment
Mm-hmm.
without kind of getting your foot in the door.
Mm-hmm.
Um, are there many opportunities for internships or I don't know, just like maybe working interviews, like a stage in a I don't know, a production company?
Mm. I think there's a lot of opportunities out there. What I'm kind of experiencing right now is um, there's a wave of companies specifically finally getting into gear and seeing that they need to foster more marginalized communities in film, which is awesome. But what I'm finding is the extent of that is women, um, which there's definitely a huge need for. Um, but what's kind of happening with that is you're inadvertently kind of cutting out the most marginalized genders, which is like trans and non-binary people,
Mm-hmm.
and further marginalizing them by like making these opportunities only for women when really what you're trying to do is make it not for men. So I think there's a lot of opportunities out there and internships and things like that. Um, but I do think that there are limiting factors at times.
Gotcha. Right on. Awesome. I appreciate that. Yeah, before we wrap, I think I just have one last question. And um, is there anything that someone should really take in consideration or they really need to understand before following in a career like yours?
Um, that's a great question. I feel like something that's really important is people often kind of operate in like a scarcity mindset when it comes to this field, and it's one of my least favorite things. um, I think when entering this field it's really important to lift each other up and like support each other as a community. One of my dear friends and mentors has a phrase, lift as you climb, which I truly believe is like an important phrase that I've kind of followed throughout my career. And I think anyone who's entering the field, like, don't forget where you came from. Don't forget how you got to where you are, and don't forget to help the next person because it's not scarce. It's just an old boys club. So help each other out.
Definitely, definitely. And I just wanted to thank you for joining me today. And I appreciate you being so vulnerable with me. I feel like I've learned a lot of new perspectives and been able to gain a lot of insight. So I appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to Closing the Gap. This podcast is a production of the Mid Valley STEM-CTE Hub. If you would like to be part of the conversation, fill out our interest form at midvalleystem.org/closingthegap. If you like the show, follow us on Spotify to stay up to date with the newest episodes. And for STEM news in the Mid-Willamette Valley, follow the Mid Valley STEM CTE Hub on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn.